In September of 1966, John Deere Junior High School, Moline, Illinois, added a new science course, Introductory Physical Science, to its curriculum. What are the objectives and philosophy of IPS? What is the course content of IPS? How is IPS different from the traditional 9th grade general science course? And what benefits do the students derive from IPS? This slide commentary will attempt to answer some of these questions. The central theme of IPS is the study and investigation of matter, with the development of evidence for an atomic model of matter as an important objective. The course places emphasis on the finding and creation of knowledge rather than the accumulation of knowledge, which is so often found in many traditional general science courses. Student experimentation is the predominant activity, while stress is placed on inquiry and reasoning on the part of the students, and the experiments performed require a way of proceeding, of doing things, of finding out. The students begin the course with a simple experiment, the distillation of wood. From this one experiment, the students find they are unable to answer many questions pertaining to this experiment, and this places them in a position of raising their own questions concerning the nature of matter. One quantity that is common to all forms of matter is that of mass. By measuring and using mass, the students discover how useful it is in studying matter, especially in finding the density of a substance, so that one is able to identify and distinguish different types of matter. In working with mass, simple experiments are introduced in order to illustrate the idea of the conservation of mass. As the students proceed through the early chapters of IPS, they are introduced to characteristic properties of matter and how these properties relate to the identification of matter. Such characteristic properties as density, melting point, boiling point, solubility, thermal expansion, and elasticity are studied, again through the use of simple experiments. The usefulness of these characteristic properties comes through the actual applications used in the separation of substances. As the investigation of matter continues, an arsenal of tools is built up in an attempt to take substances apart and put them back together again. One such tool is that of fractional distillation. By performing a fractional distillation experiment, the students become familiar with the distillation curve and its function in this type of separation technique. Constructing and interpreting distillation curves gives the students added assurance that this tool can be quite useful as a separation process if one knows when to use it and how to use it. A more sophisticated distillation of wood experiment is now attempted by the class in order to answer some of the previous questions regarding the distillation of wood experiment from Chapter 1. One of the most widely used methods of separating and purifying substances is that of fractional crystallization. And like fractional distillation, this method of separation is better understood through the use of solubility curves, which the students interpret and construct. A separation tool quite new to the students is that of paper chromatography. A special paper is used to separate the components in black ink, and the colored bands produced seem to suggest the number of substances in the black ink. Testing other colored liquids produces a variety of colored patterns on the paper, each color suggesting a different substance. Perhaps the most important student activity in the entire course is the sludge test. This unique test gives the students an opportunity to apply the methods, techniques, and procedures presented in the first 5 chapters of the course. They are asked to separate and test the components making up this sludge. During this activity, it is hoped that the students will learn that the true test of a process or method in science is its usefulness in providing new information. Therefore, the practical value of this test is very important to the philosophy and objectives of the course. Upon completion of the sludge test, the idea of pure substances begins to emerge, and a new set of tools is required in order to investigate the two examples, compounds and elements. Here, electrolysis is being used to decompose the compound water into its components, hydrogen and oxygen. This experiment clearly illustrates that hydrogen and oxygen combine in a definite mass ratio to form water. And this idea is further verified by testing other compounds to show a constant ratio of components making up the compounds. Elements are studied by applying the simple flame test. As a sample of the substance is heated in the flame of the alcohol burner, a characteristic flame color is produced. Each element emits a particular color that can be used as a means of identification. Red, for example, identifies the element strontium. While a green flame is characteristic of copper. After testing a number of different elements, the students discovered that it is difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish between some colors. Therefore, to further extend their knowledge in this area, the spectroscope is introduced to produce spectral lines. These lines turn out to be sharp and distinct for each element. Just as fingerprints are unique to human beings, so too are spectral lines unique to each element. This powerful tool can yield much information about the composition of matter, even in the most minute quantities. Assuming by now that elements have a sort of permanent nature, the students turn their attention to one of the classical experiments in science, the discovery of radioactivity. By placing small plastic containers filled with compounds on a photographic plate, the students find that some of the containers affect the film while some do not. Perhaps some of these compounds were giving off particles which affected the film. To test this idea, the cloud chamber is used to add support to this assumption. When a radioactive sample is placed in the cloud chamber, fog tracks are clearly visible, again suggesting the idea that elements are made of small, invisible particles. The Geiger counter gives a more quantitative picture of the particle nature of matter, and the clicks from the counter seem to give the final evidence that would suggest that matter is indeed made of submicroscopic particles. To help the students visualize the particle nature of matter, a model is introduced in the form of a black box experiment. The students are asked to suggest a picture or model of this box, after making observations and learning as much as they can about the box. This involves performing simple experiments on the box and making predictions of what will happen under a given set of conditions. They are then asked to give evidence for suggesting that particular model or picture. By using rubber rings and paper fasteners to represent different elements, the students can illustrate some aspects of this atomic model of matter. With the use of these rings and fasteners, the students are able to synthesize and decompose compounds of FSR in order to determine mass ratios of the two elements. This experiment also allows them to make simple predictions concerning these mass ratios in different compounds of FSR. Real compounds are now studied in order to verify the idea of mass ratios. On the basis of the mass ratios of copper to chlorine and the two chlorides of copper, the students can suggest possible chemical formulas for the two compounds, and later the idea of multiple proportions is also illustrated with these same two copper compounds. To answer the question, what benefits do the students derive from IPS, it would be most appropriate to illustrate a few of the different types of learning situations. Students learn by making observations. It takes experience to determine what is and what is not important in an experiment. After making observations, the students learn by recording useful data and later using this data to solve new and related problems. Students learn by constructing and interpreting graphs. Through the use of histograms, the students learn how to interpret group data, and from the data, make meaningful generalizations from experimental results. Learning by doing is an important objective of the course. Performing their own experiments is much more meaningful to the students. Students also have many opportunities to learn from each other. Another learning situation disliked by some students is the use of a set of achievement tests. These tests are designed to develop the students' thinking and reasoning processes, as very little, if any, emphasis is placed on factual information. Students also learn to develop confidence in themselves and in their decision-making abilities. This slide and the 5 that follow show a few of the laboratory activities and student participation.